Hello, I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of my knitting podcast, The Charm of It. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for wanting to catch up with me. And if you are a new viewer, thanks for giving me a try. I would describe myself as a detail-oriented person who loves to enjoy research, so my podcast tends to include a focus on minutia of my knitting projects and various interesting things that I learn along the way. In addition to talking about my projects, I like to muse on a more general knitting topic and share some tips or answer questions that viewers have left me. I'm always grateful when viewers leave questions because it can be difficult coming up with content every time. So that gives you an idea of what to expect from the next hour-ish. I would also like to take a moment this week, first of all, to apologize that the episode is late. Usually I release an episode every other week, and they go live on Mondays. But this week life has gotten in the way, as it sometimes does, and I went to edit the video and get it ready today, and the video I'd recorded on Monday was useless. So hence the wet hair as well. I'll apologize for that. I'm having to record now or wait another few days, so I thought I'd record now. As you can see, I have two fluffy co-hosts. One of them is Thistle, my dog, and one of them is Moth, my cat, who is being particularly quirky today. So, yeah, they hop in and out of the video as they wish. They both like laps a lot. One more thing that I would like to say before we get to the knitting is a huge thank you to everyone who helped make my birthday a little more special by leaving birthday wishes on Instagram or Ravelry or via email. I was really happy to be turning 30, and all of your kind wishes and comments and wisdom just made me that much happier. So thank you so much for adding something to my day. It's really nice to have such sweet and generous online friends. And with all of that, let's get to the knitting. I've got two finished objects to show you this week, and let's see, the pets are fighting it out for my lap. So the first one is the Stella Polaris cowl, which I am making for an online friend, Astrid, who lives in Germany. She sent me this beautiful 100% silk Liberty of London blouse, and in return, I have made her a cowl. So here's the finished object. This is a paid-for pattern called the Star Shower Cowl. I believe it's $5 on Ravelry, and I would definitely recommend it. It was very easy to follow, well written. I did not make any modifications, which if you're a regular viewer, you know is quite unusual, but I didn't need to, and I can definitely see myself knitting another one or three. And I think that this is also the kind of pattern that it would be very easy to use the basic structure and substitute in various different stitches. So yeah, I am really pleased with how this turned out. It's like a cowl shawl hybrid. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that I don't know if any of my viewers wear hijab, but if you do, this design is actually really nice as far as it veils your face, and it pretty much stays in place, like, I mean, depending on whether you need to cover all of your hair or if you don't mind showing a little bit. You might need a couple of bobby pins, but it stays very well. So something to think about if you're in a northern climate. Okay, so that's the shape. The yarn is Quince & Company Tern, which is one of my very favorite yarns. It is 70% wool, 30% Tussa silk, I believe. Might be 80-20, but I think it's 70-30. And it's made by Quince & Company, which is a wonderful little company who are very focused on ethical production, which is part of why I love them. The other part is that they make really fabulous yarns. And this is in one of the newer colorways, which is called Barnacle. And it is a gray with sea green undertones. It's lovely. I'm very excited that they came out with another gray, because before this their only gray was Stonington, which is a beautiful silver, but it's a little too cool for me. The wind is acting up on the blinds. I hope that you're not hearing that and that I can edit it and so that it's not distracting, especially if you're listening to this with speakers. But yeah, so I had a great time knitting this, and it was pretty much, it's a very easy pattern to memorize, and you don't need to think much on a lot of rows. You don't need to pay a lot of attention, so it's really fun for when you're chatting with people or watching TV. As you can tell, I don't really want to take it off, so clearly I need to knit another one. This took less than 2 skeins. I believe I have about 15 grams left over of the second skein. They're 50-gram skeins with 220 yards each, so around 400 yards, which is what the pattern called for. And if you didn't see last episode, I showed you what it looks like with just one skein. So with just one 50-gram, 220-yard skein of yarn, it already made a really nice little cowl. I think it's a really good shape. We've got a very full side table today, trying to figure out how to set that back there. The other reason why I had to record today is that I'm going to the post office tomorrow to send that out. So, the other finished object is one that you have not seen unless you follow me on Instagram, because I began it after the last episode and have already finished it. It is a shawl. I think that's right side out. Yes, okay. So this is out of Manos del Uruguay, their silk blend, which is a heavy sport, light DK, single ply, 70% merino, 30% silk. So it's a lot like Fino, but just in heavier weight. I got this at my former local yarn store when I was home for the holidays in Texas. They had an excellent sale, so I got it in several colors. The green is called Briar, and it's got these lovely pink shades running through it as well, which my camera apparently does not think you should see. And then the red is Bing Cherry. I designed this shawl myself. I'm going to take a sip of tea while my camera refocuses. I needed to start a new segment. In case you're a new viewer, my camera records in 8 to 10 minute segments, so that's why there's always going to be transitions. I think it's worth it for the better photo quality. As I was saying, I designed this shawl myself, and for the past few months I've been experimenting with various types of neckwear, and I really wanted to try the pie construction, which is P-I pie, by Elizabeth Zimmerman, who was so clever. And basically you double the stitches every time you double the rows, so you're using the geometry of circles to make a shawl. And what's really nice about that from a design perspective is that all of the increases happen on single rows, and so you don't need to try to work constant increases into any lace patterns that you want to do. So that's why I thought that this would be a particularly good method of construction to use for this shawl, because with these two colors I was very much inspired by gardens, and that's why I actually called it the cottage garden shawl. And also kind of old-fashioned Victorian Christmas cards. I wanted it to have a little bit of that feel. So with the half pie construction, it was very easy to work different lace segments. And all I did was, the red is just worked in garter stitch, and then each green segment I did in a different lace pattern that reminded me of various botanicals. I have included links on my Ravelry project page, except I can't remember what this stitch name was called, and I haven't been able to find it, but if I find it, I'll be able to put it on. I like to use the online resource knittingfool.com for a stitch dictionary, and I just made sure that whatever stitches I chose fit into the stitch count and row count I needed. Speaking of rows, I took a kind of Fibonacci approach to deciding how many rows to do, and for each green section, I made it as many rows long as the previous green section plus the red section. So I think this is 6 rows and this is 4 rows. So for this section, I wanted it to be 10 rows long. And then this final really lovely lace is from a chart from a pattern that I bought last summer when I made my first shawl. It is called Rappuccini's Garden. I really hope the blind isn't going to mess up the audio this time. I can't record again. Anyway, and so I ended up giving that shawl away, and I knew that I really wanted the design again, so I thought it would be perfect for the final thing. And then once I had done the body, I did one last row of garter with what I thought was all the red, When I went to weigh the yarn afterwards to record my final yardage numbers for my project page, I discovered like basically half a skein left of the Bing Cherry, and I think what happened was when I was caking it up, there must have been a knot, and so I started a new cake, and I didn't remember. But I think it worked out really well because having the thinner line of red works well with this edging. I really wanted to do a knit on edging, and this is actually the fourth one that I tried because I kept underestimating how much yarn it would need. So I finally went with quite a small one. I've linked it, but I think it starts at 5 stitches or something, but since this is knit out of a heavier gauge yarn, I think it adds the perfect finishing touch. And the whole time I was knitting this, I was really worried that it was going to be too small, so I blocked it very aggressively. And what I really like about knitting shawls out of heavier yarn is that you can block aggressively, so the lace opens up really nicely, but there's still a bit of substance to the fabric. So I think that on my various neckwear experiments, I've learned that I really do like heavier yarn for shawl. I think I'm the opposite of most people. I like to do my sweaters in light yarn and my shawls in heavier yarn. Although, we'll see. Perhaps for early spring and late fall, having some lighter weight neckwear will be nice. Back to this one. So I blocked it very aggressively, and I blocked it for length. Well, wingspan, I guess you would say, rather than for depth. And it turned out to be the perfect size. I think some people call these shawlettes, so I don't know. So it's really easy to just wear, I guess, in traditional kind of bandana style. And since I have so many neck and shoulder problems, it's really nice for me to not have super long ends that I have to wrap multiple times, because on some days I'm just not up for that level of wrapping. But what's really neat is that this is actually quite versatile, because you can also wrap it more like this. There we go. And it looks more like a traditional scarf. Obviously, I'd pay more attention to making sure the right sides were out. There we go. More like a traditional scarf. And then for when I want to be very Victorian, my bee is trying to pollinate. There we go. It also sits really nicely around the shoulders. And just comes down to about elbow length, which is nice, especially in the mornings when it's a little chilly. But I don't necessarily have the neck and shoulder capability to put a cardigan on yet. And I guess I could pin it or just let it sit like that. So before I knit this, I wasn't really sure if the half pie was going to work for me, because most of the pie shawls and half pie shawls that you see on Ravelry are really large, and they're beautiful, but they end up looking more like a cape or a poncho, which I'm not really sure if that fits with my style. So I'm really pleasantly surprised at what a smaller half pie shawl ends up becoming. And I love the yarn. The subtle color variations are just wonderful, and Manos do Uruguay is a fair trade company, and so they include the signature of the hand dyer on each tag, and it's supporting women in Uruguay. And yeah, so that just makes me feel extra good about it. And so this took just about 2 skeins. I think I had like 10 grams left over or something of the green, and then not much of the red at all. So I know it took less than 400 yards to make a nice little shawl. I will not be publishing the pattern for this. Writing up the pattern for the first shawl taught me that I don't really enjoy writing up patterns. I really enjoy designing things and playing around with knitwear, but then turning my experiments and quirky knitting into something coherent that other people can follow is not nearly so much fun. So what I have done is included on the project page all the stuff I told you here about the principles of how I designed this, and I think it will be really, really easy for you to design yourself. For the increases, I did yarn over increases, but I knit them through the back loop on the other side so that I didn't get the eyelet holes, just because I didn't want to have to worry about making the eyelets symmetrical. And for the red stripes, I didn't follow a Fibonacci sequence. Instead, I just, since it was garter, I doubled how many garter ridges there were in each section. And I'm still not really sure if I should have done that, or if I should have made it 1 ridge, 2 ridge, 3 ridges. But, you know, I named this cottage garden as well because those are more relaxed gardens. You kind of let things evolve as they will, and I definitely took a more relaxed approach to this shawl. I didn't decide anything until it was right in front of me, and other than the edging, I didn't really rip back that much either, so it was a very organic project, and clearly I enjoyed it because I knit it in about, I think, less than 2 weeks, so it became quite fun. I need to start a new segment, and then we will answer, well, I will answer a question from you. This week's question is from my friend Erin, who is Ersiku on Ravelry. And if you do have any knitting questions for me, there's a Ravelry group called The Charm of It, and you can always find the link in the show notes. And then there is a thread called Podcast Queries. That's the best place to leave your question because I check there before every episode. And as I said earlier, I am really happy when people ask questions, so ask away, knitting related. Anyway, so she asked, from my last episode, I showed you how I knit continental, and she mentioned that I do seem to knit fairly quickly, and if I had tried to learn how to knit more quickly. I did not try to learn to knit more quickly, but I did learn how to knit more ergonomically, and I believe that the two are related, because with ergonomic knitting, the idea is to make the movements as small as possible while still being efficient and making sure that all of your body parts, all the relevant joints and muscles are being held in the most comfortable position. So like you want your wrist to stay straight because that's its neutral. You don't want your wrist bending a lot. And so I believe that the smaller that the motions you make, of course, the faster each stitch is made. So I think that that would speed up your knitting if you're interested in that. I just learned from some YouTube videos. It was years ago, so I don't have the particular names for them, but I'm sure that if you just search YouTube for ergonomic knitting, you'll find a lot of tips and tricks. And the other things that I do that probably speed up my knitting is I keep all of the stitches close to the tips of the needles. And I had to teach my hands how to keep the stitches moving while I was knitting. It took a while for these fingers to figure it out, but I persevered, and now that feels very natural. The only time that I don't do that is when I'm doing stranded color work, because if you bunch all your stitches up, then your floats end up too tight. So that's another way to speed up knitting. And then the other thing that I did when I was learning to knit, which is a bit quirkier, but I'll share it with you. So one of the nonfiction topics that I really enjoy reading about is neuropsychology, so things about the brain. And a few books that I've read have basically talked about how your brain's imagination is almost a muscle on its own, and so when you're trying to learn something new, if you visualize doing it over and over, you get positive benefits out of that. You become better at what you're doing. Of course, you need to practice physically as well. But so I don't do this as much anymore. But when I was beginning knitting, when I was trying to fall asleep at night, or if I was doing something where I was just stuck staring off into space for a while, daydreaming, I would close my eyes and envision my hands knitting. And I think that that helped, especially, so I've been knitting continental for a while, and then I wanted to teach myself English style, and of course it's really frustrating when you're really fast or efficient at doing something one way, and then you're teaching yourself to do it another way, and you're way back to square one. And I really do think that that mental imagery helped me. It also helped when I was learning how to do stranded color work, because as I mentioned, I had to readjust some of my techniques in order to make the floats work. So if you want to try it, I know it sounds a bit new age-y, but it's supported by science and research, and feel free to Google that yourself. I'm trying to remember the names of the books that talk about this. Now that I'm 30, I have an excuse for not remembering things, right? But that would be the last of my tips for how to knit more quickly or just, more efficiently. So Also, I think speed is just one of those things that comes with the more knitting that you do, because you just get more and more muscle memory, so you don't have to think about it so much. Personally, I wish that I knit a little more slowly, because then it would be cheaper, right? Because each yard of yarn would last a little longer. But I'm trying to slow down in other ways. And with that in mind, I will talk about my works in progress. There are only two, and you've seen them both before. Before I began recording this episode, I thought about telling you guys that I was in a knitting slump, because I haven't been knitting that much the past 2 weeks. But I don't really think it's a slump. I think it's more that I am finally starting to achieve my goal that I mentioned at the beginning of the year of slower knitting, and knitting for enjoyment instead of obsessively knitting, which I know obsessively is a strong word, but sometimes that can describe the way that I knit. I'm like, oh, I should be eating breakfast, but I think I'll knit a few rows first, even though I'm really hungry. I mean, that's not quite rational. So, with that disclaimer, of course, my sister came to visit, and then I've been having a lot of neck and shoulder pain, and that's required me to stop knitting because I hand wind all of my yarn, so I was out of wound yarn for a little bit. That's part of why I started that shawl. The cottage garden shawl is because I already had that yarn wound up into cakes. The other reason why is because I needed a project with thicker yarn. As I mentioned before, for arthritic hands, it's better if you alternate needle size and needle thickness. And then the final reason was that everything else I was knitting was from a pattern, and I wanted to have something that I could be experimenting on. Okay, now that we've gone backwards in time to finished objects, let's move on to works in progress. And the first are my Elephant's Mean True Friendship socks, which are a pair of stranded colorwork socks. This is the second time I've made this pattern. The pattern is called Water for Elephants. I believe it is $4 on Ravelry, and it's a wonderful pattern. It contains all the information you need. The charts are numbered, which I really appreciate, and I would certainly think that this would be a good money well spent from my perspective. So I finished the first one a while ago. So here's what you can see what I'm working on, and I'm using another Quince yarn for this, Quince & Company Finch, which is their 100% wool fingering. It is regular wool, it is not superwash, but I've made several pairs of socks from it, and I haven't had any problems with it wearing out, even though there's no nylon in it, and I wash my socks in the washer. I just wash it, on the wool cycle, and then I hang them to dry, which is the same thing I do for all my superwash socks. So I prefer to use regular wool, not superwash wool, for pretty much all of my own knitting, although a lot of times it's difficult to find sock yarns that are suitable for that. Simply because there's enough plastic in my life as it is. I don't really need plastic in my knitted objects. And I'm fortunate enough to not be terribly sensitive to wool. There's a lot of regular wools that I can wear next to my skin without any discomfort, and so I would just rather do that. As I was saying, this is Finch, and it is in apricot, which is the really pretty gold color, and Sabine, which is the very, very dark heathered charcoal gray. Elephants! Okay, so these socks, I've been knitting them for almost a month now, but that is completely not reflective of how much time they've actually taken me to knit. The problem is that whenever my neck and shoulders hurt, I can't stare down at my lap a lot, so I can't be staring at a chart. And with this pattern, it's charted, and I've tried to memorize it, but I've not been successful. I mean, it's a large chart. It's not like Fair Isle color work, where a lot of times those are just little repeats around. This one, and it's logical to follow. It's not like the Van Gogh mints that I knit my sister, where I had to really focus on the chart. But I do have to look at the chart enough that when I'm having neck and shoulder problems, I have to put this aside. And then I needed to cake up the new skein of apricot, and it took a while for my neck and shoulders to be okay with that too. But now I've turned the heel on the second sock, and I just have a foot left, which shouldn't really take me that much time. As far as modifications go, the major one is, and this is something that a lot of people have done, I have the elephant in the triangle on the foot, the insole, instep, I'm not really sure what that's called. The pattern has it as a triangle like this, but I feel that more elephants are always better. So I've done that, and it's really easy. You just use the elephant from this chart. The only annoying thing is you have to flip back and forth between the charts. I also made the elephant with its trunk go up because some other Ravelry members did that, and apparently it's good luck. So why not? And then I did have to do some sizing modifications because the pattern only comes in one size, women's medium, and my friend wears, I think, a shoe size 9. And so I just knew that it would need to be a little bigger. So first of all, Finch is a bit plumper than a lot of sock yarns, so I could go ahead and knit it on size 2s. I'm a loose knitter, so I usually knit socks on size 0s without any problems. It's still nice and firm fabric. So that helped me upsize it. And then I added a few stitches. I added 4 stitches until here, and then I switched to just 2 stitches on these 2. So I decreased here because I didn't really want to have to mess with the elephant chart, and I decreased here so that it would be symmetrical. But I left the 2 extra ones here, and if you have the pattern, the charts are really helpfully divided into 4 segments, which is why I have stitch markers to keep me on track. And so there's like a blank line in between them, so it's really easy to envision an extra square, and I just knit it with whichever color makes more sense. And you can see, and then I'm going to decrease that once I get to the elephant, but you can see the effect of adding a little bit of extra. It just, see, it widens right here. But I think it still looks good. And I'm super pleased with how these are turning out. I'm very grateful. My friend is wonderfully patient. And so I know that she'll really love these. And she's already tried the one on, so I know that they fit. So yeah, that's one of them. And the other one is another sock project. Can you tell that I need to cast something on soon? It's not socks, but those are my Nebula socks, which are my first attempt at helix striping. And basically at this point I've been knitting for long enough that I have a shoebox full of sock yarn leftovers. You'll actually see that later because this week's topic is on stash. And so when I thought that I've been looking for various ideas to use up those kinds of sock quantities, like 10 to 30 grams, because I'm not going to make a sock yarn blanket. And really I would rather use them to make more pairs of socks. So my issue with regular striping is that jogs really annoy me. And I do use Techknitter's method for jogless stripes, which does help, but I can still see it. I can still see a little bit of a discrepancy, and it annoys me, even though no one else is going to be staring at the back of my ankle or anything. So when I came across helix striping, it seemed like a really great idea because it gives you 1 row stripes without any jogging whatsoever. And it's almost like magic because, okay, so basically you're knitting each round, you knit each needle, or if you're using magic loop, you would just put stitch markers where you're changing color in a different color. So even though you're only knitting a quarter of a round in each color, it makes single row stripes of every color going up, which is pretty awesome. So I dyed up some yarn inspired by photos from NASA of various nebulae running around our universe. They're stunning. And I dyed up my leftovers, and I'm making these socks. And I've decided that, so I dyed the yarn to cheer myself up, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and I'm really pleased with the outcome, but I didn't really think about the fact that I tend to prefer neutral stripes. Like, I have several striped shirts, and they're all neutrals. I do not like colored stripes. So this is not much forward thinking on my part, but luckily the inside of the fabric looks really cool. So I'm going to wear these inside out, and I actually turned the heel in a way that reflects that. Like the outside of the heel is on this side of the toe of the sock, if that makes sense. So I think that this side looks more nebula-like anyway, and you can see I am getting a bit of tensioning issues where I'm switching the colors on each needle. I'm hoping that that blocks out, but if not, since they're knee socks, I'm knitting them with a lot of negative E, so when I try it on, you really can't see that. And yeah, I'm inside out, I really love how they've turned out. I probably would not wear them as much this side out just because of my weird thing with not wanting colorful stripes, only neutral stripes. And I am getting really close. I really hope that my camera is just going through like a bad mood and that it's not a permanent focusing issue. But as my blurry head was trying to tell you, I have almost gotten to the bottom of my kneecap. So I've probably got 10 or 15 rounds left. As you can tell, as far as I'm concerned, knee socks should be knit with as much negative ease as you can possibly do, just so that they don't slide down all day. So I did do some calf shaping, but I waited until, trying it on, the sock was not going to go any further at my calf. And it looks pretty dramatic. I think I ended up adding 10 stitches, and I started with 48 stitches. So I ended up adding about 25% because I have quite curvy calves. And then I decreased it quite quickly, which once again reflects my calf shape. So my plan is, once I get to kneecap level, I will just knit in 1 by 1 rib with what's left of the gray, which is not a color that I dyed. This is, I can never remember, Fiber Seedlings, Sprout. It's on my project page in the elephant color. And so that way when I'm wearing boots, I have an option to wear with just, it'll have the gray showing. And I'm going to knit that in 1 by 1 twisted rib probably, and I'll probably do the pearls twisted as well so that I can fold down the cuff and it'll be identical. I have to admit that this is not the most relaxing project ever. I expected, since it's plain stockinette, that this would be the project I'd pull out whenever I just had a few minutes and, didn't want to have to think too hard. But because at almost every needle, I'm picking up a new yarn color, and the way I tension the yarn when I'm knitting continental is quite elaborate. This is what I do. Because I'm a loose knitter, so I need to have quite a bit of drag on my fingers. And so having to do that several times in each round, and then having to do the yarn management with 4 little balls of yarn attached at once. They're showing up brighter than they are in real life. Oh look, they match my shirt. Anyway, it just is not quite as relaxing as you would expect a stockinette sock to be. But that's okay, because, if I'm slowed down a little, then I just get more hours of enjoyment out of it. And the yarn management is not too bad. I find that every 8 to 12 rounds, I need to stop and untangle. And especially when the sock was smaller, I could just dangle it and it would untwist. Now that it's a lot longer, I can't really do that. So I have to, move the balls of yarn to untwist it. But it's not too bad. I would definitely do helix stripes again in a neutral color. I'm not sure if I would do them knee socks. I don't know. I'm still adjusting to knitting knee socks instead of regular length socks. So by the end of the first one, I'm like, I'm ready for this to be done now. I don't have that kind of patience. I need to start thinking of them as sleeves because I love knitting sleeves. So, but I really do love the effect that helix knitting provides. Once I finish this one, I'm not sure that I'll start the second one right away. And that's because our weather has really warmed up enough that by the time I finish the second one, knee socks are not going to be needed. So there's no rush from the wearing it perspective. And I kind of want to be knitting a more involved sock pattern, and these are my only sock knitting needles, my size 0 DPNs. And I can't just buy another pair because the company who manufactures these, their wood supply source burned down a year ago. So until they get that sorted out, you can't buy wooden needles from them. But yeah, I really want to be doing another pair of socks, so I might put this project into hibernation. I don't usually do that, which tells you that, clearly I'm not terribly amused by the yarn management that I'm having to do. But I think that in this case, if I cast on for the second one right away, I'll be knitting it resentfully. You don't want to resent your knitting, so I'll probably put the project in hibernation. Luckily, I've been knitting long enough now that I wonder if you can hear my neighbor rearranging his furniture. Anyway, I've been knitting long enough that my tension doesn't change too much, so I probably won't have any problems knitting the second one later this summer and having them match. So that's my current thoughts on that. Probably won't see a finished pair for a while, but I will certainly be able to show you the finished sock on the next episode. I haven't really decided what I'm going to cast on next. I'm still contemplating. April is a funny month here. I mean, I love April. It's my birth month. But it's funny in the sense that I know that the heat is going to approach pretty soon. So if I were to start another wool sweater now, that would mean, since I prefer bottom-up sweaters, that I would end up knitting the yoke and the sleeves, so have that whole sweater in my lap probably in May. I don't have air conditioning, so I don't know if I want a lap full of woolly sweater in May. It depends on what the weather's doing. Last year we had an unusually hot May. It was no fun for me. But do I really want to start knitting in plant fibers yet? I don't. My hands find it much more difficult to knit with plant fibers, so I really want to put that off until it's hotter. So see, I'm in this indecisive mood. That's the other reason why my knitting has slowed down. So I'm not really sure what I'll be doing yet. Next episode will be May already. Where's the year going? And I will be talking about spring and summer knitting. So we'll get into a lot more detail about that in 2 weeks. But yeah, I'm not really sure what I'll be casting on. But clearly I need something other than 2 pairs of socks, because they're both very similar. So my brain and my hands would both like a little more variety. Now that I've talked about my works in progress, I'm going to start a new segment, and we will move on to the topic of this week, which is stashing. As regular viewers know, back in January, I decided that I was just going to knit from stash for a while. I added quite a bit to my stash last fall compared to my usual method, which is to have a small stash. And there were reasons for that, but I decided that it was big enough and that it was time to just start enjoying the stash and knitting from it. It's ironic that I'm choosing to talk about this in my birthday yarn episode because there are going to be acquisitions. But I've had no problem knitting just from stash since January. The only yarn that I've bought has been for other people's projects, which comes out of my gift budget, not my knitting budget, so that's fine. And it's very relaxing for me to know that I'm not buying yarn, because that means that I'm not looking at it. I have found, and this is true with clothing too, I love clothing, and when I gave myself a monthly budget, that meant that I was constantly looking for things to buy, right? Like I would be visiting the thrift stores because I prefer secondhand, or checking eBay, checking my eBay searches, and with yarn, I would be going through Ravelry D-Stash or reading reviews of yarn and thinking, maybe I can try knitting something with that one, and like stalking it on D-Stash or stalking all the different colorways, imaginary, window shopping. And for me, I'm very inspired by the voluntary simplicity movement and countercultural ideas that try to break the kind of hyper-consumer mindset that is very heavily pushed in 21st century US. I can't obviously speak for the rest of the developed world, but here, definitely, it's kind of I shop, therefore I am, would be the general mindset. And knitting is the first hobby I've had that really involves a lot of consumption, and especially a lot of buying at the retail level. Almost everything in my life is secondhand, even my pets are rescue pets. And it's been my default. And when I first began knitting, it took a really long time to realize that buying yarn on Ravelry D-Stash saves you money, but usually not a lot of money. It's not the same as being able to thrift a silk blouse for $4 versus, $80. You're not going to get that kind of savings level shopping secondhand yarn. And I know that some people thrift wool sweaters and unravel them for the yarn, and I think that's wonderful that they do that, but I've tried that a couple times and it hasn't worked for me, and it doesn't seem to add joy to my knitting experience, so that's why I haven't really pursued that. But back to the idea. So for me, I love knitting, but it's also been a challenge that knitting seems to give me the onesies. where, you know, oh, I want that yarn. Ooh, I want that yarn. Luckily, I don't use project bags, so I haven't gotten onto the project bag bandwagon. And I love the needles that I have so much that I have no interest in buying needles. But yarn, you know, it's really easy to spend an hour window shopping yarn, and that could have been an hour that you're spent knitting. So everyone is different, but for me, I found in my clothing, and now I'm finding for yarn as well, instead of giving myself a monthly budget and buying something every month, it makes more sense for me to basically divide my annual budget in two and then do one big shop for spring, summer, and one big shop for fall, winter. That's how I do my clothes. Although this year, anyway, we don't need to get into clothes. So that's why I have really enjoyed being on a no buying yarn diet for the last few months, because it lets me shut down that kind of consumer side, and I can just admire the yarn and stuff, but I don't need to go checking if there's something on DStash or frantically researching it, because I know that I'm not going to be buying it. So in the future, I'm trying to decide how that will approach yarn buying. I think what I'll probably end up doing is something similar to my seasonal clothing shops, because I've also found, now that I have a more extensive stash, I have several sweaters worth of yarn in my cupboards, and that's wonderful, but it also means that my present self and my future self, we're committed to what my past self thought we'd want. And so, for instance, I would really like to try knitting a sweater out of lace weight yarn, because I suspect that it will be very useful lace weight wool yarn for my lifestyle. However, first I need to knit all of the fingering weight quantities that I have. And so my perspective has changed over the last few months, but my stash has not magically evolved with it. So for me, the current size of my stash is too large, not because I don't have the space to store it, and not because I feel bad about the money. I mean, I had a budget and I stuck to it, and I am really happy to be able to support businesses I like or get really wonderful yarn via good deals on DStash. Sometimes you can get excellent deals. Anyway, so I'm not uncomfortable with it from that perspective, but I am uncomfortable with the fact that so many of my future projects are locked into place by something that I decided several months ago. I want to be able to pick my next sweater and buy the yarn for it and cast on. So that's something to think about for the future as well. And how does that fit into shopping regularly versus irregularly? I haven't really decided all of this yet. I'm just sharing my thoughts along the way now that I've been knitting from stash for almost 4 months, and as someone who's had both pretty much no stash and now has a fairly substantial stash from my point of view. Might not be substantial from yours. You can see all the yarn in my cupboards on my Ravelry page, because I really like putting all the yarn that I own into Ravelry. I love how it lets me track how much is left over. Details person. So you can always go there if you're curious. So those are my thoughts as far as stashing. For me, I definitely don't think I want to stash more than 2 or 3 months ahead. But other people's mileage may vary. I just really, I mean, I can't predict what I'm going to like in 2 years. I know that I'm probably going to like similar colors that I do now, but who knows what's going to catch my eye. Now, all of that comes with a major caveat, and that's for colorwork knitting. I feel like in colorwork knitting, you almost need a fairly generous stash if you're doing Fair Isle type colorwork knitting, where you want to be using 8 to 12 colors in one project, and you're only going to use small amounts of each ball, then if you just buy per project, it can feel a little overwhelming at times. And so I don't know why somehow mentally it feels less overwhelming for me to just buy like lots of colors at once, not for a specific project. I don't know. That's just me. But I do think that even though I want to keep the rest of my stash fairly small, I definitely will enjoy having quite a few colorwork yarn options, because that way when you're swatching, you can try out a bunch of different shades and colors and that kind of thing. The other thing that I wanted to talk about with stash was where I store mine. I took 3 photographs for you guys. My stash lives on the top shelves of my kitchen cupboards. I will insert them here. I didn't want to make you guys motion sick with me trying to hand hold my video camera across from it. I wouldn't be using these shelves for anything else because I'm short and I've got neck and shoulder issues, so I certainly would not keep anything heavy up there, and it has worked really well. I keep them all in Ziploc bags just because it is a kitchen. I don't want smells, and I don't keep them over the cupboard that's right in the cupboard that's right above my stovetop, just in case. But I haven't had any problems with smells or anything like that. And as you can see, the smallest cupboard has 2 shoe boxes, and that's where all of my leftovers from projects live. One of them is devoted to fingering weight yarn, sock yarn, and the other one is devoted to all the other yarns. I am lucky to have a fairly functional stash, just because I always buy with projects in mind, so I don't have a lot of single skeins that I'm not sure what to do with. My single skeins are sock yarn, and I know that I'm going to make a pair of socks with them. But I definitely feel that for me, having a smaller stash makes more sense, just for the style that I knit and design and that kind of thing. I know that some people feel that having lots of yarn on hand lets them be more creative and knit via whim and be more inspired, but for me, I'm fairly orderly. I don't cast on a lot of new projects until I finish some, so, and I have a general idea of how quickly I'm going to be knitting, so I certainly have enough warning time to be able to buy yarn for my next project. And the yarn that I do have in stash, I all bought for specific projects, so it's not as if, I'm letting for it to speak to me. I don't know. That just doesn't seem to be my style. But I thought that I would share that as an update, and I'll give you another update at the 6-month mark, although I will be buying yarn for a summer linen cardigan for myself. So that'll be the first yarn, other than my birthday yarn, that I've bought for myself this year, and I don't have any summer sweater quantities in my stash, so that's fine from my perspective. Basically, I don't want to be duplicating yarn that's already in my stash. I think I've said the stash so many times that if this were a drinking game, you guys would be on the floor. And so let's talk about my birthday yarn, since it's appropriate to this discussion. First up is the yarn that I bought for myself. So I reviewed my stash, and I have several sweater quantities, as I mentioned, that I want to knit before I start any new sweaters, and I've got lots of sock yarn, so I don't need to add anything to my sock stash. However, my neckwear stash has pretty much been gone. I think I've knit all the projects that I plan to knit. I'm sure that I could piece together shawls from leftovers, but as far as that, so I decided that I should definitely get some yarn for neckwear. And as I've been doing these experiments, I found a few that I really like, but the one that I love the most is the Sylvan cowl that I made following the Stockholm cowl pattern, and it's quite large. I think it's like 14 to 15 inches, which is 40-ish centimeters. Deep, tall, I'm never really sure, that way. And then it's long enough that I can loop it twice around for it to be kind of loose and stylish, and then when it's really cold, you can loop it 3 times around so that it's really snug against my neck and doesn't let any air in. So I decided that I would really like another cowl like that. And one of the things that I enjoy about knitting is being able to try breed-specific yarns. I haven't tried that many yet, but the ones that I've tried, I have definitely found a lot of value out of. And I don't have any new breeds in my stash, so I decided to go ahead and do a breed-specific yarn. And since it was my birthday and a treat, I looked at some hand dyeing companies, because I can't really afford to always knit with hand-dyed yarn. I don't think most of us can. But I really love the kettle-dyed and tonal variations that you get with some of those yarns, like the semi-solids are what I like the most versus the variegated. They make me nervous because I can't control when the color is going to change. And so then finally, to decide on the color, I looked over everything, and teal is one of my favorite colors, all the blue-greens, and has been for years. And I did not have any teal, well, not much. waiting for me in my cupboards. So after much thought, I decided on that, and I ended up getting Blue Moon Fiber Arts. This is their Silky Victoria base. Yes, it really is larger than my head. They tend to make big skeins. I'm not sure why. Probably has to do with trying to get similar dye lots. Anyway, so this is the Silky Victoria base, which is 85% Polworth wool and 15% silk. I just realized that I must have been spelling this wrong. Sorry. And the colorway is Tempest, which is this really beautiful semi-solid teal. Showing a little lighter and a little greener on the camera. We'll see if I can adjust that in post-processing. But you'll be able to see a photo on my stash page. And I've already gotten hair on it. And this is 695 yards. So I will be able to make another very big, generous cowl without worrying about running out of yarn. And if I do have leftovers, I'll be able to make a matching hat or mittens. So I wanted to tell you guys a bit about Polworth yarn, but I forgot to have the reference pulled up on my phone. So I need to start a new segment soon anyway. I'll just go ahead and Yarn and I are back. I am reading from The Knitter's Book of Wool by Clara Parks. My library has an e-copy, so I just checked it out. And the Polworth, and I was spelling it right, Polwarth. It must just be their font, or maybe they misspelled it. I don't know, it's not me. Anyway, so it was bred in Australia, and it is essentially 75% Saxon Merino and 25% Lincoln. It's a dual-purpose breed valued as much for its meat as for its fiber, and it tends to thrive under diverse conditions, including damp climates where merinos typically don't do so well. The Polworth produces a truly lovely fleece that rivals merino in softness and has a marvelous crimp and good elasticity. The addition of Lincoln, which is a long wool sheep, jeans gives the fiber a hint more length, strength, and luster with an enhanced strength that performs beautifully in shawls. Polworth usually is spun worsted and in multiply form. In South America, the breed is known as, in English, I would pronounce the word ideal. I think in Spanish it would be ideal. So now you know as much about Polworth as I do. So basically, it's a beautiful yarn. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see. But I think it's a 3-ply, this particular one. And it's definitely got quite a bit of bounce to it. And it's super soft and squishy. But it does seem to have a little more of that shininess that you get with the long wool. So I'm really pleased to be able to knit with it, and I'll report back, since I've made several merino neckwear lately, as far as the differences, the blocking, and that kind of thing. And as I said, their skeins tend to be quite large. So I believe this retails for $34, and then of course you have to pay for shipping. But for my birthday, I am really excited about this, and I actually think that this is what I'm going to cast on as some variety with all the socks that I'm knitting. I'm planning to design the cowl myself. I've already got a few ideas, and I'm going to call it the Rusaka cowl, which are Eastern European water sprites. It's really funny because I love the water and I love the ocean, but I love the forest even more. Like, if you gave me a choice between a beach cottage and a cottage in the woods, I would pick the cottage in the woods without even having to think about it. If you do have a cottage in the woods that you would like me to come live in, let me know. So it's funny that so many of my project names end up with like water references as opposed to woods references. I think that's because I look better in cool muted colors, which tend to look more ocean-like than wood-like. But I have plans for some future projects that I'll be able to give more wood-like names. And on that rambling, my other birthday yarn was a present from my parents. And if you follow me on Instagram, you already know what it is, because I could not resist sharing a photograph. And so a few episodes ago, I shared with you some Alice Starmore Hebridean 2-ply yarn that I received as a super generous gift. And I told my mother about this, and then for my birthday, she and my father got me 21 more colors of it. Since it's a yarn designed for color work, it sells in 25 gram skeins instead of 50 gram skeins, which means that you can get more colors. One moment. This one! Come on! Apparently, she would prefer to be lifted than jump up. As I was saying, so they were able to get me quite a few colors, and I am completely in love with it. It arrived in this box of just happy magic. I'm so thrilled about this. It's such a generous gift from them. They're always very supportive of my hobby. Hopefully I didn't just flash you my entire address. I realize that some people are not going to want to see all of the different magical colors, and that's perfectly fine. I'm going to place like a white card at the transition, and you can just skip ahead to the next section. But if you are interested in this yarn, oh my goodness, all these colors. So I thought I would show them to you in color groups so that you could kind of see the differences. But I just realized that they are no longer arranged because this is my second time recording. So I will be right back, and then the yarn will be better arranged. So between my parents and Tanya, my friend, I now have 28 of the 36 colors that she offered. The camera is showing them as a little more vivid than they are in real life. But I thought I would show them to you in groups once we saw the giant yarn hug. So that you could compare and contrast the colors yourself. So let's start with some reds. Okay. So this one is Sea Anemone, which you've already seen. I'll wait for it to focus. Okay, so Sea Anemone. This one is Mountain Hare. This one is Crowdle. This one is Red Deer, and finally we have Capercaillie. So as you can see, some of them are more brick red and have more browns in them. Some of them are more true reds, but almost all of them have these amazing heathered shades that, excuse me, are almost impossible to capture on camera. But they're magical. I can't wait to see how they knit up together. And then we've got some reddish purples. You've already seen Limpet and Driftwood. Oh, I'm having focusing issues again. This one is Erica, and then this one is Clover. My mom asked for a list of colors that I'd be interested in, and I included Clover on the list because I read somewhere that whenever you're making a palette for Fair Isle type stranded knitting, you should always include a color that frightens you. So bright colors tend to frighten me. It's not quite as bright as it's showing up on camera, but it's part of the summer line, which are definitely the brightest yarn she has on offer. I guess we'll do greens next. Let's see. Okay. Oh, I'll do the blue-green as well. I'll put that in there. Sorry. Okay, so this one is Bog Bean. This one is Kaluna. This one is Lapwing. And then we have Sea Ivory and Dulce. It's interesting to me because these two, they're close, but this one is much more silvery, whereas this one is much more of a warmer color. This is the one that I would be able to wear on its own, whereas this one I would only use in color work combinations. And then it surprised me how close Lapwing and Kaluna were. Just, I don't know, they seem closer than I expected them to, and I think it's just because she put so many colors in each blend. Oh, I think I'm breaking my camera here. Then the yellows and oranges. So you can see, I've definitely got the full color wheel, and that's the photo I shared on Instagram if you want to see them all arranged as a color wheel. Oh. Okay, so we've got Corncrake, Golden Plover, Sundew is this one, and then Fulmar, and Spindrift, which you saw. So, aren't those a beautiful kind of gradient? I can't wear these close to my face. They make me, they turn my skin very yellow, but as accent colors, I just love these kinds of golden shades. And finally, the blues. There's so many blues. We're going to split them into two parts. We'll do the light ones first. Here we go. So Longoose is the lightest, and then Kittiwake, and then Pebble Beach, which I'm putting in the blues, but really it's got like every color in it. You saw this last time, but it's funny, whenever I enter her yarn on my stash page, sometimes I can't even pick which color family I should be putting it in. And then for the medium and darker blues, let's see if I can hold them all at once, just because I think it'll benefit most if you can see them all. Yep, okay. We're going to start on this side this time, and this one is Mara, which I already had, so you've seen that. Next to it is Shearwater, and then there is Summer Tide from that same summer collection, and then Storm Petrel, Kelpie, and Selkie, which once again I put it with the blues, but it's got a whole bunch of colors in it. Whereas Kelpie is a much deeper navy. And those are all of them. The lovely Andrea from Fruity Knitting Podcast asked me on Instagram which were my favorites, and of course that's difficult to pick, but I'll show you a few that just won my heart right away. Oof. Trying to bend over for them all. It's not the easiest. Okay. So I would say these are some of the ones that are more my natural inclination. But honestly, I'm just terribly excited to have so many options for being able to swatch. And because I'm pretty sure that most of these colors, I'll stop moving in a minute, are going to change dramatically depending on what colors you put next to them because they're heathered colors. You might have noticed there are no grays. I find it very interesting that her line doesn't include any grays because gray, of course, is one of my favorite colors. And I actually think that it will be good for me because it will challenge me. In the past, when I've done multiple color work, I tend to always pick a color and a neutral. The Cottage Garden shawl, where I combined the green and the red, it took me, I had to like talk myself into that. So thanks to Alice Starmore, even the more neutral options still belong to a recognizable color family. So there are no grays, there are no true whites or blacks. And I'm really looking forward to working without my usual gray crutch. Although I'm sure that eventually I'll order some of the beautiful grays that you can get in Jamieson's and Jamieson and Smith, the Shetland yarns. I want to swatch and see because I think this yarn is not Shetland, even though it's spun similarly. It's another 2-ply light twist, but I think it might be a little heavier than the Shetland yarn that I have. So I'm going to knit them up together and see if they play well or if I should keep them separate. So those were my birthday yarns. I thought it was kind of amusing to juxtapose those stash enhancements with talking about my discoveries from not adding to my stash for a while. But I could not be more thrilled. What I love about getting yarn for presents is that then I have the finished object and I always think of the person with that. Some people on Instagram asked me how I'm going to be able to bear to break up the color wheel because it's so beautiful on its own. So I think what I'm going to do is take a few more photos over the next couple weeks, and then I'm going to go ahead and skein up all of them at the same time. That way none of them will feel precious, and that way when I start experimenting with swatches, which is what I plan to do as part of my warmer weather knitting, I'll be able to just grab one and add it without thinking, I would add it, but I don't really want to wind it. So that is how I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the yarn does not become too precious to knit with, is to jump right in with both feet and cake it up. I mean, cakes are beautiful too. Maybe I'll do it in balls instead of cakes. I think they'd be even cuter as balls. But that's not as practical because they tend to run around, and I do not vacuum frequently enough for me to be dropping yarn on the floor all the time. Speaking of stranded work, the book that I have to review today is a very exciting one, and I will start a new segment and be back with it. So this is the Knit Sonic Stranded Colorwork Sourcebook by Felicity Ford. It is independently published by her, and therefore, and she's English. So it's 19 pounds, plus you have to get it shipped to the US. So between the pound to dollar conversion rate and shipping and everything, this cost me just under $40. And that's why I hadn't bought it before. But I really love her podcast, and I really loved the idea of a book that taught me how to take daily inspiration and, the quotidian joys, which is part of my Instagram profile, and turn them into beautiful knitted works of art. And so then I saw on her blog that she's running low on the second shipment, and she's not sure if she'll do a third run, and if so, when. And my heart kind of seized, and I realized that I would be sad if I wasn't able to buy this, and that it was worth putting $40 into for me, especially since I really want to make this summer, which is not my favorite season, more enjoyable by doing quite a bit of stranded color work. So I bit the bullet, and I ordered it. And I am so glad that I did. I genuinely think it is worth $40. And I say that as someone who usually gets her books from the library or buys them used for like $2 plus free shipping because betterworldbooks.com. Wonderful. Anyway, so basically, instead of thinking of this as a book, I think of it as like a class or a workshop that I can just refer back to because it looks quite thin, but it's just completely packed with information. And I know that there are a lot of reviews online as well praising it, and I completely agree with all of those reviews now. There is some information for general stranded knitting, but then most of it is really breaking down the creative process of not only choosing colors, but also charting your own designs. And one of the things that I love the most, and I think it's okay for me to show once, is that for each, she does chapters on various everyday subjects. And she includes swatches and her notes on them, which is just incredibly helpful. So you can see how she adapted and changed and overcame problems. And so for me, it really was like having a class. And I cannot wait to start putting this into practice. The chapters are, so first she describes the system in general. And at the back, she includes charts for some of the things that she likes the most, in case you want to replicate one of the things she does completely. And then she also includes a chapter on how to go from swatches to actual garments that you want to wear, and includes patterns for mitts and leg warmers, which are pretty basic patterns. But the meat, to me, of the book is in the 3 chapters called A World Full of Things, A World Full of Places, and A World Full of Plants. So she takes these steps that she outlines in the first chapter and puts them into practice in her own world. And she makes it very detailed. She does not leave it up to kind of ambiguous. Like when you're trying to learn something creative, sometimes it's implied that you're just creative or you're not. And clearly, Felicity Ford does not believe that, because she breaks down each step and really empowers you to become creative yourself. So I am thrilled to have been able to purchase this book. I know that it won't be within the means of everyone. It was once again part of my little 30th birthday celebration for myself. The one thing that I wish that she had done was give some suggestions on building a colorwork stash. As I mentioned earlier, I feel like it would be useful for this type of knitting in particular to have quite a few different balls of yarn just waiting in my cupboard. But I'm not really sure since I can't just go out and buy all 1,000 colors of Jameson and Smith, or Jameson's, I can't remember which one has 1,000. I'm not really sure which ones would be most useful to start with. And so that's one thing that I wish that she had addressed. But that is a very small quibble. And I definitely enjoyed this. I think I'm going to do some swatches and turn them into wall decorations with some of the beautiful Alice Starmore yarn. I have to get a new memory card, guys. I've been rambling for a long time today. I feel like this episode is going to look very disjointed because I keep having to start new segments. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it anyway. As I was saying, this book definitely met and surpassed my expectations. I am thrilled to have it on my shelf, and I am positive that I will be referring to it frequently. I feel like it really helped. It systematized what I'm hoping to do with my stranded color work, and it gave me very concrete steps to follow, and I cannot wait to see what happens as a result. I will say that I am glad that I also have the Alice Starmore Fair Isle knitting book, which gets a lot more into how to do the Fair Isle with garments, and also a little more into color theory. And I think that the two together are an excellent complement. As someone who, as I mentioned earlier, prefers solid and semi-solid and heathered yarns to variegated, I really feel like, but I love the look of multiple colors in one project, so I really feel like stranded color work is going to be something that I'm going to become more and more into in the future. And for now, clearly I have enough Alice Starmore yarn to play with to definitely capture some of the inspiration in my life. I think that when I start to build a colorwork stash with Shetland yarns, or even I have enjoyed doing colorwork with Quince & Company too. It's a worsted spin rather than a woven spin, so it gives you a different effect, but I feel like their 100% wool line is very, well suited to stranded colorwork if you're looking for an option like that. But as I was saying, I think that for building a stash, eventually what you would want is a light, a medium, and a dark in at least the major groups around the color wheel, and then of course some neutrals. If you are an experienced stranded knitter and would like to share your tips about what colors you find most useful and what variety of colors, I would love to hear that over in the forum. I believe that we are just about done for today. Thank goodness, right? If I filled a whole memory card. I just have one more thing. Actually, I have two more things. So I have one Knits in the Wild. I was wearing my sweaters for the first few days that my sister got here because she hasn't seen most of my wool sweaters. I don't bring them home to Texas. And it was quite chilly when she first got here. So I wore a different sweater every day, but I forgot to take photos. You know how when you get out of the habit of something, you just don't think about it anymore. But I do have one photo. Since she hadn't visited before, we went to several different sightseeing type places around town, and there's this really neat old cemetery. So I wore my thistledown sweater, as you can see, and I tucked it into a vintage thrifted tweed wool skirt that kept me nice and warm. I also wore a little brown velveteen jacket over top, but I had taken it off for the photo because I wanted the sweater to show. And I don't think I was wearing leg warmers. I can't remember. But yeah, so I have one Knits in the Wild photo for you. I apologize for not having more. And then I also have, I can't even remember what I was calling this segment, but whenever I come across a knitting reference in a regular book that I'm reading, I like to share it with you guys if possible. And I did come across one this week. This is from Caprice and Rondo by Dorothy Dunnett, which is the 7th book in the House of Nicolo series. Dorothy Dunnett writes historical fiction, but she writes historical fiction like no one else I've ever read. She writes it on a very grand scale, and there's a lot of description, and there's all of these insanely complicated plotting devices, both in this one and the Lyman Chronicles. She has a main hero who is incredibly intelligent and subtle, and so the schemes that they develop, you slowly see them come to fruition, and she hides quite a bit from the reader, but in a very enjoyable manner. And she also, like, their personal lives, I mean, they make soap operas look normal. And I say that, but when you're reading her books, the plots just work. because the books are on such a grand, rich, luscious scale that having insane plots is perfectly fine. So if you enjoy the kind of fiction that, doesn't dumb itself down for readers and really leaves it up to you to read a lot between the lines, then definitely try this. I prefer the Lyman Chronicles so far. There are 6 in those. There's 8 in these, and I'm now in the 8th. But the Lyman Chronicles also include a lot more quotations in foreign languages, so if that puts you off, start with Niccolo. Anyway, as I was saying, so Keita is one of the main characters, and she's this very energetic, very intelligent Dutch young woman, and I think in book 6 she learned to knit, so her knits have featured every once in a while since then, and these are set in the late 15th century. I think this one is 1472. They've covered like 16 years, but so knitting was fairly new, and I'm pretty sure that back then the knitting guilds were for men. But so here's what it says. And she and Nicholas have been talking, and Nicholas has just fallen asleep. Nicholas is the main character. She kept his hand for a while, contemplating the broad palm and strong fingers that could both preserve life and take it away. She wondered if he would adopt her advice or even remember it. She thought that she would knit him a glove with 2 thumbs if he did. She gave him back his warm hand and walked away, turning at the door to scan him for the last time. He was wholly asleep by then and no longer smiling. I have no idea why she would knit him a thumb with 2 gloves. I don't know if that's a reference to, or a glove with 2 thumbs. I don't know if that's a reference to something, or if it's just because, his hands have the power to do both, or what is going on. But there was a knitting reference in the book I was reading. The 7th and now I'm in the middle of the 8th book have definitely been my favorites of this series, by the way. There's a good payoff. I will also warn you, since I recommended her, she doesn't pull her punches. She likes to throw a lot of very challenging events in the way of her characters, and characters do die. So be prepared. These are not the kind of historical fiction that you read when you need to just relax and escape and have something and know that you're going to have a happy ending and that it's all going to end well, because with her you never really know. It could end well, or she could not so much. So yeah, I thought I would include that warning. And now I believe that is everything that I wanted to talk about. Both of my pets have given up on me. Moth is sleeping on the cat tree and Thistle's in the chair back there. She had the bad timing to try to get my lap when I was sharing the colorful yarn, the Alice Starmore yarn, and there just wasn't space for her and all the yarns. I wanted to go ahead and share a little bit of my good fortune with the Alice Starmore yarn. And so I'm going to give away 2 little handmade color cards. I have 28 of the 36 colors that she offers. And so for 2 people who are interested, I will go ahead and put all 28 samples of all 28 colors and get those in the mail for you. Obviously, this would be for if you're planning on buying some of her yarn. I find it in the reasonable luxury category. Depending on what your currency exchange rate is with the British pound, that might vary, but go to her website. If you spend at least 25 quid, you get free shipping worldwide, which I think is wonderful. So I'm willing to send the samples anywhere in the world. They're lightweight enough that I can afford that. And I will start a thread on the Ravelry group. And let's see. Why don't you share a stranded colorwork project that you would love to knit? Either you have knit or a pattern that you would like to knit that has 3 colors or more, because that will give me lots of inspiration. And for now, I will say goodbye to you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to keep up with me in the meantime, I am the Charm of It on Ravelry. You can friend me or join the group there. On Instagram, I am quite active. I like to share my knitting projects, and I reply to comments and all that kind of stuff. I love to follow other knitters as well, so be sure to reach out to me there. And my blog is thecharmofit.wordpress.com, where you can always find show notes and photographs of all of the projects that I'm talking about. And feel free to message me on Ravelry. I began the podcast in order to connect with other knitters because I wasn't really finding any kindred spirits locally, and it has succeeded beyond, anything. So I still am incredibly grateful to all the viewers who reach out, and I have had some wonderful friendships that have resulted. So feel free to contact me, and otherwise I will see you in 2 weeks when who knows what kinds of projects I will have in my basket, but I'm sure that I will find something to talk about. Bye. Consider this your PS because I almost forgot. I have 2 more podcast recommendations. If you're like me, you're always looking for a video podcast to add to your watch list because once you catch up with someone, then you have to wait 1 to 2 weeks for a new episode, and that's no fun. So one of them is a very new podcaster. She only has 1 podcast episode out, and that is The Gentle Knitter, but she has been blogging for many years as Coco Knits. And I actually found her blog before I began knitting, and I found it incredibly inspirational, and it was part of what made me really want to learn how to knit. And so I'm very excited that she is going to be podcasting. She believes that she'll be doing 1 episode a month, which is better than nothing. So you can go ahead and look her up. Lots of knitting there. She really enjoys grays and blues, which is nice for me. And then the other podcaster is Bex, who does, I'm sorry, Bex, why did my mind just blank out? Fiberkin? I believe it's Fiberkin. The link will be in the show notes. And she and I'm going to look it up now, started podcasting around the same time. So, back in the fall? Let's see, Bex. Yes, Fiberkin, okay. But then she went on a trip to India, and so she hasn't been able to podcast for a while, and now she's back to podcasting, so I can recommend her. She is English, but she lives in Melbourne with her partner, and after India, they did go back to England, so she's currently podcasting from England, where she's spending time with her family. But she is very down to earth and does really cool projects, and she's so sweet and supportive, and she always makes me smile. She has a very cheerful attitude, and her knitting projects are always really neat. She favors muted colors as well, so I'm always getting a lot of inspiration from her and what she's up to. She used to work in a yarn shop too, so she's very knowledgeable about that type of thing. And I believe that her latest episode is her 6th or 7th. She tends to do shorter episodes, which is nice sometimes when you can't fit in an hour-long one. It's nice to have some shorter ones to watch as well. So I would highly recommend her. You can also follow her on Instagram as Bex in Real Life, which is very fun. She's also another feminist, and so I really like that. It's always wonderful to connect with feminists around the world who aren't afraid of that kind of label, if you know what I mean. So those are 2 podcasts that will keep you busy, and I will see you all again in 2 weeks. Goodbye for real this time.